if we're doing, patient-centered care work, actually including patients in the research, I think is important.
Welcome to another episode of HFIG Talks. This is Chelsea, HFIG's president. I'm also joined by Suzanne, one of our communications directors. And for this episode, we talked to UofT's newest human factors prof, Dr. Myrtede Alfred, about her research and what brought her to UofT. Welcome, first of all, and thank you for agreeing to be on our podcast. To start with, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey to becoming a prof at UofT?
So the question, I guess, is where do I start, right? So actually, I have a background in history and business. So my journey to IE and human factors was a little roundabout. So I went to FIU for my undergrad, and before then, I probably didn't even know what industrial engineering was, right? So I graduated, and then I was working in banking, and I had a colleague who had IE magazine on her, IE magazine on her desk. And at this point, by the time I had graduated, I knew what IE was because I took as an elective course, operations research course, really just because I needed one extra course to be considered full-time for scholarships. And so it fit my schedule. So I took this operations research course, and I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. And so when I saw that magazine on her desk, I was like, oh, you're an IE? And she's like, yeah. And so we started talking about, the work that she's been able to do. And then I said, you know what, I'm very much interested in that. And she's like, yeah. And so when I decided to go to school for my master's, I decided I would study IE and not continue on, the history kind of trajectory, even though I really do enjoy studying history, right? And so my initial goal when I went to Clemson was actually, I went to Clemson as a coursework only master's student because I thought I was going to get my degree in IE and actually plan to go back to banking because I enjoyed the work I was doing in banking. I worked on the back end, monitoring accounts for, illegal foreign transactions, illegal wire transfers, illegal money exchange, that kind of cool, interesting stuff, right?
Yeah, that does sound cool.
It really is. And so I met some very cool people at Clemson, including who eventually the two advisors, I was co-advised by Dave Nyans and Anand Gramapati. And so I met them while at Clemson, and I started doing some work with Dr. Gramapati, looking at virtual environments and how we design and how we learn in virtual environments. And then Dave Nyans was actually I think he was a lab mate of Beerson. And so that's a funny connection there, but he had taught the intro to human factors course at Clemson. And so after that course, he had, talked to me because he's like, hey, you really seem to do well in this. You seem to kind of understand it. I saw that you're just here for master's degree. You're only doing courses. I think you should consider, doing research, and, I'd be happy to be your advisor. Dave was really good. Dave actually is really good at recruiting students. And so they encouraged me and to do my PhD. And so I started working with Dr. Gramapati and Dr. Nyans, Dave Nyans. And and so once I graduated from Clemson, I had the opportunity to pivot into some healthcare research. And that's what I've been doing the past 3.5 years, working as a research assistant professor at the Medical University of South Carolina. And so it's a nice position. I've been embedded in the hospital, so I've gotten to see a lot of how clinical systems work. But with this position, I don't really have an opportunity to work with students. And I just didn't really have the opportunity to kind of lead the type of research program that I was leading. And so that kind of led me to find some different opportunities. And it just so happens that University of Toronto was one of them.
And what aspect of U of T or of Toronto in general kind of drew your attention?
A couple of things. So it's, obviously it's a great institution, has, attracts a diverse group of students internationally, which is really cool. Particularly coming from South Carolina, right? Um, the human factors research coming out of the institution is great. The human factors team is great. Um, and then there's also some strong human factors healthcare research that's being done. And so that integration I think was also cool, particularly given my background and the work that I've done the past 3.5 years. And so it made sense. The faculty who I met with were very encouraging, and very open to the work I do. And so, yeah, it was a great opportunity for me. So yeah, that was a very long-winded responses going back to my undergrad days, but I think it all speaks to how I think people from different backgrounds kind of end up in human factors. And based on listening to some of the interviews you did with other professors, it seems like quite a few of us have kind of these non-traditional paths.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the academic process. So, what was the hiring process like? Sorry, and particularly during the pandemic.
It was a lot of Zoom calls, a lot of Zoom calls, and so I think it's I think it was pretty similar to what it would have been, um, or what it was before the pandemic, right? Is a similar process. I think it just moved from in person to Zoom, and as we're all human factors folks, we understand that it's not it's not a non-trivial difference, being able to travel somewhere and actually see the institution, and talking across the desk to someone is not the same as sitting at your own desk for several hours in front of a screen. But I think the process was pretty similar, except for a bunch of Zoom calls and not having the free lunches and free dinners that generally come with with the academic job search process.
Do you have any tips for people who are considering academic positions?
Um, I think the biggest tip I would have, for folks looking for academic jobs. Obviously, I think we all know, we have to have our strong CVs and the publications and being able to work on grants and networking are all things that would set you up for the type of position you want. But I think one of the things that job seekers should understand, I think, you feel pressured or the need to try to sell yourself when you're applying for these jobs. But I really do think it's a two-way street. I would encourage, you to be authentic with who you are, the type of research that you want to do, because you don't want to end up in an institution that's not a good fit for you as well, right? You want to get the job offer, obviously, but at the same time, it's you don't want to be at an institution that's not going to support you because you try to make yourself fit into what they want, or try to kind of uh, sell the parts of your research that they were most interested in, but you weren't necessarily the most passionate about. And so when you're interviewing with these um, institutions, I think you should also look at it in terms of, is this the right institution for me? And one, I think it takes a little bit of the pressure off, because it's no longer about selling yourself to them. It's about, like, let's see if this makes sense for the both of us, because they might want you and you might realize that it's not a good opportunity or the best fit for you.
Are there any kind of specific things you would recommend looking out for when you're kind of doing those interviews?
So for me, my work is in patient safety and in patient equity. And so I think, some it's not as traditional in the human factors kind of research area to kind of be doing the work that I'm doing. Because I think it does have, I'm approaching it from the clinical systems perspective, but I do work closely with social scientists and public health folks because I think, it's, and this is specifically in reference to my maternal health work, it obviously has a big social component, big social determinants of health component. And so that research is not, that's not something, some folks might not consider that as, what's the word I'm looking for? Human factor-y, if I can say that, as what some of our more typical kind of research areas. And so it was important to me that I was going to be able to do this work in an environment that I felt supported in. And when with the search committee, I told them that's exactly what I want to do, and they were like, "That's awesome, that's great," and that was great for me to hear. I didn't have to feel like I had to kind of change the angle of how I present my research. And so I think obviously being able to find people you can collaborate with, but making sure that your colleagues kind of respect and understand the value of your research, I think is important. And that, that was for me personally, but I think that would be, one of the things to look out for. Like, are you going to have good supportive colleagues who are going to help you through the tenure process?
That's kind of a good segue to talking about some of the work that you're doing now or the work that you're planning to do once you get to U of T. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so my dissertation research examined how the fidelity of virtual environments impact learning and retention, so that we can think better about how we design those environments. And so I haven't worked on that in a couple of years, but interestingly, with COVID and universities having to quickly shift to virtual learning, it's kind of had it's had renewed interest. So I've been thinking about that, but I'll probably focus on the work I've been doing around patient safety and equity, specifically in the perioperative realm. And I just got, some funding to lead a project examining how clinical systems contribute to maternal health disparities. So I will continue, I'll continue that work and build off of that. But I'm still looking for opportunities to incorporate the work I've done with virtual environments and how we design them and build them to support learning and retention, maybe around patient education. So I think integrating kind of that, but more with a healthcare kind of twist.
I wanted to ask about the trends that you're seeing in human factors research for the next couple of years, I guess. It could be in general or specific to your research area as well.
Yeah, so two of the trends I've been excited about is around including more patients and thinking more about their journey in patient safety research and work. It's interesting how I think we tend to leave the patient out, of a lot of the work that we do in patient safety, interestingly enough. And so I think that's one of the trends I've been excited about, as well as I think just the broader application of human factors in some of these social justice challenges. Our social science colleagues have really, pushed us in terms of how we think about equity. Human factors, I think, has been a little late to that party, but I'm happy to see that we're thinking more about equity in design, and we're thinking more about how human factors can be leveraged in some of these social justice challenges, but because I think we have a lot to offer to these problems. We just need more people, committed to doing so.
Do you have any kind of tips or suggestions for people who are wanting to include more of that equity lens in their research, or wanting to like leverage their human factors skills to help with those problems?
Yeah, so I think it's partly going to be domain specific, but I think recognizing that there are people who have been working on these problems for longer than we have, and there are people who are impacted by these problems, who don't have our expertise, but who have, they have the lived experience, and so, coming in and working with them, right, and letting them, you know, letting them lead, and not kind of taking over from their voice, I think is important, particularly when we think about the equity piece. And so I think, like I said, we can add value, but I think we have to work with the people who have the lived experience, and we have to work with the disciplines who have been doing this work for a lot longer than we have.
Yeah, definitely. And then you also mentioned you trying to include the patient more in patient safety research. How do you kind of go about doing that in your experience, or in kind of what you're planning to do?
Yeah, so so with this first maternal health project I'm working on, that is more focused on the clinical systems, but as a complement to that, I applied for some funding to look at the patient's journey. So I kind of thought of it as having this one lens of what is happening with the actual providers, the nurses, the patient care techs, the OBGYNs, the maternal fetal medicine specialists. What are their experiences like in terms of providing care, but also what is the patient experience like when they're going to their prenatal care appointments, when they're giving birth, and after they've been discharged, um, and they're having to deal with postpartum care, right? And so with that work, it's not as integrated as I would like it to be. I have one project but also because of the funding structure there, there were small pots of funding. So one project focused on the clinical, on the providers, and the other project focused on the patients, to hopefully give us the full picture of what what this experience is like for both the patients and the providers when we think about how we deliver maternal care. But I've seen people use like patient advisory committees in terms of their grants, and on their grants, particularly larger pots of funding that can support being able to pay for pay for patients' time. I've seen just having like a patient family liaison included on their research. But there are a couple different ways to include the patients. I think it's going to be more specific to your research, but patients can be a part of, they don't just have to be the people we're collecting data on. They can be supporting us in the data collection. They can support us in the analysis and interpretation of the data. They can provide us with their thoughts in terms of, IRB related issues, right? Or they can kind of serve as advisors or consultants of the overall direction of the research. I think it's going to depend on kind of the context and what makes sense. But I think moving towards that model where if we're doing patient stuff, patient safety work, if we're doing, patient-centered care work, actually including patients in the research, I think is important and valuable.
Yeah, definitely. That totally makes sense. Those are all of our kind of prepared questions, but did you have any other thoughts or comments or anything else you wanted to share?
No, nothing particularly. Nothing specific. I just want to thank you both again for your time and inviting me on the podcast. I'm very much looking forward to starting at UofT August 1st, and I'm from Miami, and I been living in South Carolina for the last 7 years, so I'm gonna need some help, adjusting to Toronto. So I'm open to your tips and guidance.
Yeah, I used to live in a city. I'm from Turkey. My city would go to like 45 degrees Celsius. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, but very hot. My tip would be to get a good shoe, like pair of boots, and a good jacket.
That's what folks have been telling me. Don't be cheap on your boots and your boots and your jacket.
I think boots are the most important. That's what I've noticed. Yeah.
Okay, good to know.
Well, yeah, thank you again for speaking with us today, and we look forward to seeing you around in the future.
Okay, perfect. It was nice meeting you both.
Thank you again to Professor Alfred for taking the time to be on the podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode and stay tuned for more episodes coming soon.